Two Look at Two by Robert Frost.
Love and forgetting might have carried them a little further up the mountainside, with night so near. But not much further up they must have halted soon in any case, with thoughts of a path back, how rough it was, with rock and washout, and unsafe in darkness, when they were halted by a tumbled wall with barbed wire binding. They stood facing this, spending what onward impulse they still had, in one last look, the way they must not go, on up the failing path, where, if a stone or earth slide moved at night, it moved itself. No footstep moved it. This is all, they sighed. Good night to woods. But not so. There was more. A doe from round a spruce stood looking at them across the wall, as near the wall as they. She saw them in their field, they her in hers. The difficulty of seeing what stood still, like some up-ended boulder split in two, was in her clouded eyes. They saw no fear there. She seemed to think that too, thus they were safe. Then, as if they were something that, though strange, she could not trouble her mind with too long, she sighed and passed unscared along the wall. This, then, is all. What more is there to ask? But no, not yet. A snort to bid them wait. A buck from round the spruce stood looking at them across the wall, as near the wall as they. This was an antlered buck of lusty nostril, not the same doe come back into her place. He viewed them quizzically with jerks of head, as if to ask, why don't you make some motion, or give some sign of life? Because you can't. I doubt if you're as living as you look. Thus till he had them almost feeling dared, to stretch a proffering hand and a spell breaking. Then he too passed unscared along the wall. Two had seen two, whichever side you spoke from. This must be all. It was all. Still they stood, a great wave from it going over them, as if the earth in one unlooked-for favor had made them certain earth returned their love. A Girl's Garden by Robert Frost. A neighbor of mine in the village likes to tell how one spring, when she was a girl on the farm, she did a childlike thing. One day she asked her father to give her a garden plot, to plant and tend and reap herself, and he said, why not? In casting about for a corner, he thought of an idle bit of walled-off ground where a shop had stood, and he said, just it. And he said that ought to make you an ideal one-girl farm and give you a chance to put some strength on your Slim Jim arm. It was not enough of a garden, her father said, to plow. So she had to work it all by hand, but she don't mind now. She wheeled the dung in a wheelbarrow along a stretch of road, but she always ran away and left her not nice load and hid from anyone passing. And then she begged the seed. She says she thinks she planted one of all things but weed. A hill each of potatoes, radishes, lettuce, peas, tomatoes, beets, beans, pumpkins, corn, and even fruit trees. And yes, she has long mistrusted that a cider apple in bearing there today is hers, or at least maybe. Her crop was a miscellany when all was said and done, a little bit of everything, a great deal of none. Now when she sees in the village how village things go, just when it seems to come in right, she says, I know, it's as when I was a farmer. Oh, never by way of advice, and she never sins by telling the tale to the same person twice. Wild Grapes by Robert Frost. What tree may not the fig be gathered from? The grape may not be gathered from the birch? Is all you know the grape, or know the birch? As a girl, gathered from the birch myself, equally with my weight in grapes one autumn, I ought to know what tree the grape is fruit of. I was born, I suppose, like anyone, and grew to be a little boyish girl. My brother could not always leave at home, but that beginning was wiped out in fear, the day I swung suspended with the grapes, and was come after, like Eurydice, and brought down safely from the upper regions. And the life I live now's an extra life I can waste as I please on whom I please. So if you see me celebrate 2 birthdays and give myself out of 2 different ages, one of them 5 years younger than I look, one day my brother led me to a glade where a white birch he knew of stood alone, wearing a thin headdress of pointed leaves, and heavy on her heavy hair behind, against her neck an ornament of grapes. Grapes. I knew grapes from having seen them last year. One bunch of them, and there began to be bunches all round me, growing in white birches, the way they grew round leaf, the lucky's German, mostly as much beyond my lifted hands, though, as the moon used to seem when I was younger, and only freely to be had for climbing. My brother did the climbing, and at first threw me down grapes to miss and scatter, and have to hunt for in sweet fern and hardhack, which gave him some time to himself to eat, but not so much, perhaps, as a boy needed.
So then, to make me wholly self-supporting, he climbed still higher and bent the tree to earth, and put it in my hands to pick my own grapes. Here, take a treetop. I'll get down another. Hold on with all your might when I let go. I said I had the tree. It wasn't true. The opposite was true. The tree had me. The minute it was left with me alone, it caught me up as if I were the fish and it the fishpole. So I was translated to loud cries from my brother of, "Let go! Don't you know anything, you girl? Let go!" But I, with something of the baby grip, acquired ancestrally in just such trees, when wilder mothers than our wildest now hung babies out on branches by the hands, to dry or wash or tan, I don't know which. You'll have to ask an evolutionist. I held on uncomplainingly for life. My brother tried to make me laugh, to help me. "What are you doing up there in those grapes? Don't be afraid. A few of them won't hurt you. I mean, they won't pick you if you don't them." Much danger of my picking anything. By that time, I was pretty well reduced to a philosophy of hang and let hang. "Now you know how it feels," my brother said, "to be a bunch of fox grapes, as they call them, that when it thinks it has escaped the fox by growing where it shouldn't, on a birch, where a fox wouldn't think to look for it, and if he looked and found it, couldn't reach it, just then come you and I to gather it. Only you have the advantage of the grapes. In one way, you have one more stem to cling by, and promise more resistance to the picker." One by one I lost off my hat and shoes, and still I clung. I let my head fall back, and shut my eyes against the sun, my ears against my brother's nonsense. "Drop," he said. "I'll catch you in my arms. It isn't far." Stated in lengths of him, it might not be.
"Drop, or I'll shake the tree and shake you down." Grim silence on my part,
as I sank lower, my small wrists stretching till they showed the banjo strings. Why, if she isn't serious about it, hold tight a while till I think what to do. I'll bend the tree down and let you down by it. I don't know much about the letting down, but once I felt ground with my stocking feet and the world came revolving back to me, I know I looked long at my curled up fingers before I straightened them and brushed the bark off. My brother said, "Don't you weigh anything? Try to weigh something next time so you won't be run off with by birch trees into space." It wasn't my not weighing anything so much as my not knowing anything. My brother had been nearer right before. I had not taken the first step in knowledge. I had not learned to let go with the hands, as still I have not learned to with the heart, and have no wish to with the heart, nor need that I can see. The mind is not the heart. I may yet live as I know others live, to wish in vain to let go with the mind of cares at night to sleep, but nothing tells me that I need learn to let go with the heart.
The Gum Gatherer by Robert Frost. There overtook me and drew me in to his downhill early morning stride, and set me 5 miles on my road, better than if he had had me ride, a man with a swinging bag for load, and half the bag wound round his hand. We talked like barking above the din of water we walked along beside, and for my telling him where I'd been, and where I lived in mountain land, to be coming home the way I was, he told me a little about himself. He came from higher up in the pass, where the grist of the new beginning brooks is blocks split off the mountain mass, and hopsless grist enough it looks ever to grind to soil for grass. The way it is will do for moss. There he had built his stolen shack. It had to be a stolen shack, because of the fears of fire and logs that trouble the sleep of lumber folk, visions of half the world burned black and the sun shrunken yellow in smoke. We know who, when they come to town, bring berries under the wagon seat or a basket of eggs between their feet. What this man brought in a cotton sack was gum, the gum of the mountain spruce. He showed me lumps of the scented stuff, like uncut jewels, dull and rough. It comes to market golden brown, but turns to pink between the teeth. I told him, this is a pleasant life, to set your breast to the bark of trees that all your days are dim beneath, and reaching up with a little knife to loose the resin and take it down and bring it to market when you please. The Runaway by Robert Frost. Once, when the snow of the year was beginning to fall, we stopped by a mountain pasture to say whose colt. A little Morgan had one forefoot on the wall, the other curled at his breast. He dipped his head and snorted at us, and then he had to bolt. We heard the miniature thunder where he fled, and we saw him, or thought we saw him, dim and gray, like a shadow against the curtain of falling flakes. I think the little fellow's afraid of the snow. He isn't winter broken. It isn't play with the little fellow at all. He's running away. I doubt if even his mother could tell him sakes it's only weather. He'd think she didn't know. Where is his mother? He can't be out alone. And now he comes again, with a clatter of stone, and mounts the wall again with whited eyes, and all his tail that isn't hair up straight. He shudders his coat as if to throw off flies. Whoever it is that leaves him out so late, when other creatures have gone to stall and bin, ought to be told to come and take him in.
Paul's Wife by Robert Frost. To drive Paul out of any lumber camp, all that was needed was to say to him, "How is the wife, Paul?" and he'd disappear. Some said it was because be bad no wife and hated to be twitted on the subject. Others because he'd come within a day or so of having one and then been jilted. Others because he'd had one once, a good one, who'd run away with someone else and left him. And others still because he had one now. He only had to be reminded of. He was all duty to her in a minute. He had to run right off to look her up, as if to say, "That's so. How is my wife? I hope she isn't getting into mischief." No one was anxious to get rid of Paul. He'd been the hero of the mountain camps ever since, just to show them, he bad slipped the bark of a whole tamarack off whole, as clean as boys do off a willow twig, to make a willow whistle on a Sunday April by subsiding meadow brooks. They seemed to ask him just to see him go, "How is the wife, Paul?" And he always went. He never stopped to murder anyone who asked the question. He just disappeared. Nobody knew in what direction, although it wasn't usually long before they beard of him in some new camp, the same Paul at the same old feats of logging. The question everywhere was, why should Paul object to being asked a civil question? A man you could say almost anything to, short of a fighting word. You have the answers. And there was one more not so fair to Paul, that Paul had married a wife not his equal. Paul was ashamed of her. To match a hero, she would have had to be a heroine, instead of which she was some half-breed squaw. But if the story Murphy told was true, she wasn't anything to be ashamed of.
You know, Paul could do wonders. Everyone's heard how he thrashed the horses on a load that wouldn't budge until they simply stretched their rawhide harness from the load to camp. Paul told the boss the load would be all right. The sun will bring your load in, and it did, by shrinking the rawhide to natural length. That's what is called a stretcher. But I guess the one about his jumping so's to land with both his feet at once against the ceiling and then land safely right side up again back on the floor is fact, or pretty near fact. Well, this is such a yarn. Paul sawed his wife out of a white pine log. Murphy was there, and as you might say, saw the lady born. Paul worked at anything in lumbering. He'd been barred at it taking boards away for, I forget, the last ambitious sawyer, to want to find out if he couldn't pile the lumber on Paul till Paul begged for mercy. They'd sliced the first slab off a big butt log, and the sawyer had slammed the carriage back, to slam end on again against the saw teeth, to judge them by the way they caught themselves when they saw what had happened to the log. They must have had a guilty expectation something was going to go with their slam banging. Something bad left a broad black streak of grease on the new wood the whole length of the log, except perhaps a foot at either end. But when Paul put his finger in the grease, it wasn't grease at all, but a long slot. The log was hollow. They were sawing pine. First time I ever saw a hollow pine. That comes of having Paul around the place. Take it to Bell for me, the sawyer said. Everyone had to have a look at it, and tell Paul what he ought to do about it. They treated it as his. You take a jackknife and spread the opening, and you've got a dugout, all dug, to go a fishing in. To Paul, The hollow looked too sound and clean and empty, ever to have housed birds or beasts or bees. There was no entrance for them to get in by. It looked to him like some new kind of hollow. He thought he'd better take his jackknife too. So, after work that evening, he came back and let enough light into it by cutting to see if it was empty. He made out in there a slender length of pith, or was it pith? It might have been the skin a snake had cast and left stood up on end inside the tree, the 100 years the tree must have been growing. More cutting, and he bade this in both hands, and looking from it to the pond nearby, Paul wondered how it would respond to water.
Not a breeze stirred, but just the breath of air he made in walking slowly to the beach, blew it once off his hands and almost broke it. He laid it at the edge, where it could drink. At the first drink it rustled and grew limp. At the next drink, it grew invisible. Paul dragged the shallows for it with his fingers and thought it must have melted. It was gone. And then, beyond the open water, dim with midges, where the log drive lay pressed against the boom, it slowly rose, a person. Rose a girl, her wet hair heavy on her like a helmet, who, leaning on a log, looked back at Paul. And that made Paul in turn look back to see if it was anyone behind him that she was looking at instead of him. Murphy had been there, watching all the time, but from a shed where neither of them could see him. There was a moment of suspense in birth when the girl seemed too waterlogged to live, before she caught her first breath with a gasp and laughed. Then she climbed slowly to her feet and walked off, talking to herself or Paul, across the logs like backs of alligators, Paul taking after her around the pond. Next evening, Murphy and some other fellows got drunk and tracked the pair up Catamount, from the bare top of which there is a view to other hills across a kettle valley. And there, well after dark, let Murphy tell it, they saw Paul and his creature keeping house. It was the only glimpse that anyone has had of Paul and her since Murphy saw them falling in love across the twilight mill pond. More than a mile across the wilderness, they sat together, halfway up a cliff, in a small niche let into it, the girl brightly, as if a star played on the place, Paul darkly, like her shadow. All the light was from the girl herself, though, not from a star, as was apparent from what happened next. All those great ruffians put their throats together and let out a loud yell and threw a bottle as a brute tribute of respect to beauty. Of course, the bottle fell short by a mile, but the shout reached the girl and put her light out. She went out like a firefly, and that was all. So there were witnesses that Paul was married, and not to anyone to be ashamed of. Everyone had been wrong in judging Paul. Murphy told me Paul put on all those airs about his wife to keep her to himself. Paul was
The Sound of Trees by Robert Frost. I wonder about the trees. Why do we wish to bear forever the noise of these more than another noise so close to our dwelling place? We suffer them by the day, till we lose all measure of pace and fixity in our joys, and acquire a listening air. They are that talks of going, but never gets away, and that talks no less for knowing, as it grows wiser and older, that now it means to stay. My feet tug at the floor, and my head sways to my shoulder, sometimes when I watch trees sway from the window or the door. I shall set forth for somewhere. I shall make the reckless choice, some day when they are in voice, and tossing so as to scare the white clouds over them on. I shall have less to say, but I shall be gone.
Putting in the Seed by Robert Frost. You come to fetch me from my work tonight, when supper's on the table, and we'll see if I can leave off burying the white, soft petals fallen from the apple tree. Soft petals, yes, but not so barren quite, mingled with these, smooth bean and wrinkled pea, and go along with you ere you lose sight of what you came for and become like me, slave to a springtime passion for the earth. How love burns through the putting in the seed, on through the watching for that early birth, when, just as the soil tarnishes with weed, the sturdy seedling with arched body comes shouldering its way and shedding the earth crumbs.
The Exposed Nest by Robert Frost. You were forever finding some new play. So when I saw you down on hands and knees I the meadow, busy with the new cut hay, trying, I thought, to set it up on end, I went to show you how to make it stay, if that was your idea, against the breeze. And if you asked me, even help pretend to make it root again and grow afresh. But 'twas no make-believe with you today, nor was the grass itself your real concern. Though I found your hand full of wilted fern, steel-bright June grass, and blackening heads of clovers, 'twas a nest full of young birds on the ground. The cutter bar had just gone champing over, miraculously, without tasking flesh, and left defenseless to the heat and light. You wanted to restore them to their right, of something interposed between their sight, and too much world at once could means be found. The way the nestful every time we stirred stood up to us as to a mother bird, whose coming home has been too long deferred, made me ask, would the mother bird return, and care for them in such a change of scene, and might, out meddling, make her more afraid. That was a thing we could not wait to learn. We saw the risk we took in doing good, but dared not spare to do the best we could, though harm should come of it, so built the screen you had begun, and gave them back their shade, all this to prove we cared. Why is there then no more to tell? We turn to other things. I haven't any memory, have you, of ever coming to the place again, to see if the birds lived the first night through, and so at last to learn to use their wings.
My November Guest
By Robert Frost.
My sorrow, when she's here with me, thinks these dark days of autumn rain are beautiful as days can be. She loves the bare, the withered tree. She walks the sodden pasture lane. Her pleasure will not let me stay. She talks, and I am fain to list. She's glad the birds are gone away,
She's glad her simple worsted grady is silver now with clinging mist. The desolate, deserted trees, the faded earth, the heavy sky, the beauties she so wryly sees. She thinks I have no eye for these, and vexes me for reason why. Not yesterday I learned to know the love of bare November days, before the coming of the snow. But it were vain to tell he so, and they are better for her praise. A Hillside Thaw by Robert Frost. To think to know the country and not know. The hillside, on the day the sun lets go 10 million silver lizards out of snow. As often as I've seen it done before, I can't pretend to tell the way it's done. It looks as if some magic of the sun lifted the rug that bred them on the floor, and the light breaking on them made them run. But if I thought to stop the wet stampede, and caught one silver lizard by the tail, and put my foot on one without avail, and threw myself, wet-elbowed and wet-kneed, in front of 20 others wriggling speed, in the confusion of them all a glitter, and birds that joined in the excited fun, by doubling and redoubling song and twitter, I have no doubt I'd end by holding none. It takes the moon for this. The sun's a wizard, by all I tell, but so's the moon a witch. From the high west she makes a gentle cast, and suddenly, without a jerk or twitch, she has her spell on every single lizard. I fancied when I looked at 6 o'clock, the swarm still ran and scuttled just as fast. The moon was waiting for her chill effect. I looked at 9. The swarm was turned to rock, in every lifelike posture of the swarm, transfixed on mountain slopes almost erect. Across each other and side by side they lay. The spell that so could hold them as they were was wrought through trees without a breath of storm, to make a leaf, if there had been one, stir. It was the moon's. She held them until day, one lizard at the end of every ray. The thought of my attempting such a stay. Goodbye and Keep Cold by Robert Frost. This saying goodbye on the edge of the dark and the cold to an orchard so young in the bark reminds me of all that can happen to harm an orchard away at the end of the farm. All winter, cut off by a hill from the house, I don't want it girdled by rabbit and mouse. I don't want it dreamily nibbled for browse by deer, and I don't want it budded by grouse. If certain it wouldn't be idle to call, I'd summon grouse, rabbit, and deer to the wall and warn them away with a stick for a gun. I don't want it stirred by the heat of the sun. We made it secure against being, I hope, by setting it out on a northerly slope. No orchard's the worse for the wintriest storm, but one thing about it, it mustn't get warm. How often already you've had to be told, keep cold, young orchard, goodbye, and keep cold. Dread 50 above more than 50 below. I have to be gone for a season or so. My business a while is with different trees, less carefully nourished, less fruitful than these, and such as is done to their wood with an axe, maples and birches and tamaracks. I wish I could promise to lie in the night and think of an orchard's arboreal plight when slowly, and nobody comes with a light, its heart sinks lower under the sod, but something has to be left to God. The Need of Being Versed in Country Things by Robert Frost. The house had gone to bring again to the midnight sky a sunset glow. Now the chimney was all of the house that stood, like a pistol after the petals go. The barn opposed across the way, that would have joined the house in flame, had it been the will of the wind, was left to bear forsaken the place's name. No more it opened with all one end for teams that came by the stony road to drum on the floor with scurrying hoofs and brush the mow with the summer load. The birds that came to it through the air at broken windows flew out and in, their murmur more like the sigh we sigh from too much dwelling on what has been. Yet for them the lilac renewed its leaf, and the aged elm, though touched with fire, and the dry pump flung up an awkward arm, and the fence post carried a strand of wire. For them there was really nothing sad, but though they rejoiced in the nest they kept, one had to be versed in country things, not to believe the phoebes wept.
A Line Storm Song by Robert Frost. The line storm clouds fly tattered and swift. The road is forlorn all day, where a myriad snowy quartz stones lift, and the hoof prints vanish away. The roadside flowers, too wet for the bee, expend their bloom in vain. Come over the hills and far with me, and be my love in the rain. The birds have less to say for themselves in the wood world's torn despair than now these numberless years the elves, although they are no less there. All song of the woods is crushed like some wild, easily shattered rose. Come, be my love, in the wet woods come, where the boughs rain when it blows. There is the gale to urge behind, and brute are singing down, and the shallow waters aflutter with wind, from which to gather your gown. What matter if we go clear to the west, and come not through dry shod? For wilding brooch shall wet your breast, the rain-fresh goldenrod. Oh, never this whelming east wind swells, but it seems like the sea's return to the ancient lands where it left the shells before the age of the fern. And it seems like the time when, after doubt, our love came back amain. Oh, come forth into the storm and root, and be my love in the rain.
Brook in the City by Robert Frost. The farmhouse lingers, though averse to square with the new city street it has to wear a number in. But what about the brook that held the house as in an elbow crook? I ask as one who knew the brook, its strength and impulse, having dipped a finger length and made it leap my knuckle, having tossed a flower to try its currents where they crossed. The meadow grass could be cemented down from growing under pavements of a town. The apple trees be sent to hearthstone flame. Is water wood to serve a brook the same? How else dispose of an immortal force no longer needed? Staunch it at its source with cinder loads dumped down. The brook was thrown deep in a sewer dungeon under stone. in fetid darkness still to live and run, and all for nothing it had ever done, except forget to go in fear perhaps. No one would know, except for ancient maps, that such a brook ran water. But I wonder if from its being kept forever under, the thoughts may not have risen that so keep this new built city from both work and sleep.